Mira, a black waitress at Sonny's Diner in the quiet town of Ashford, not far from the bustling city of Riverside, where Snoop Dogg's fame was well known, had no idea that on one fateful day, she would make a decision involving standing up for him against a harsh critic. She lost her job, but what happens next will blow your mind. Like, subscribe and comment to see how standing up for what's right changed her life forever. The evening shift at Sonny's Diner was always predictable for Marrera, a 30-year-old waitress with a warm smile and a knack for making every customer feel special. Located in a quiet part of Ashford, not far from Riverside, where Snoop Dogg's fame was legendary, Sonny was a refugee for the older locals who came in to enjoy pie and coffee while chatting about days gone by and watching their favorite music videos on the old TV hung in the corner. For Marrera, the diner was more than just a job. It was a comfort zone, a place where she knew everyone by name. But tonight, that familiar rhythm was about to change. The bell above the door jingled, signaling a new customer. Marrera glanced up casually, expecting to see a regular. But her heart skipped a beat when she saw who walked in. It was Snoop Dogg, the Snoop Dogg of the rap world, one of the most celebrated musicians globally. Snoop was well known in the Riverside area, given his ties to California's hip-hop scene. For a moment, Mira froze, unable to believe her eyes. Snoop was dressed casually in a hoodie, gold chain, and his signature sunglasses, looking like he was trying to stay under the radar. But even in his simple attire, his aura filled the entire room. The older patrons at the counter turned to look. Whispering among themselves, some craned their necks, trying to confirm if it was really him. Mira's pulse quickened. She'd seen him perform countless times on TV, but she never imagined he'd walk into her quiet little diner. Marrera, known for her warm smile and attentive service, having worked at Sonny's Diner for 3 years, memorized the orders and quirks of the diners who frequented the place. The fact that Snoop Dogg, a celebrity, came to their quaint diner was a big deal for her and the other regulars because they were huge fans of his music. Gathering her composure, she approached his table with her usual friendly demeanor. "Good evening. What can I get for you tonight?" Snoop smiled warm, a kindness in his eyes that immediately put her at ease. "Just a coffee black and maybe a slice of whatever pie you've got coming right up," Marrera said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She returned to the counter, aware of the buzz his presence was causing. The regulars were murmuring, some smiling in awe, others shaking their heads as she placed the coffee and pie in front of him. She tried to act normal. "Here you go, enjoy." "Thanks," Snoop said, offering her another smile before turning his gaze out the window. Marrera couldn't help but watch him for a moment. There was something unassuming about him despite his fame. He seemed lost in thought, maybe even a little tired, but not everyone shared her admiration. George, one of the older regulars and a huge fan of old-school jazz, was infamous for his bluntness and at times overly critical opinions. Mia was thrilled to serve someone of Snoop's stature. She admired him not just for his incredible talent in music, but also for his charitable work off stage. Yet as George stood and approached Snoop's table, her excitement quickly turned to unease. "Excuse me," George began, his gruff voice cutting through the diner chatter. "Aren't you that rapper guy, Snoop Dogg?" Snoop looked up, smiling politely. "Yeah, that's me." George crossed his arms, his face twisted with skepticism. "I've been reading about you. You make millions, but what do you actually do for folks who need it? Heard you're pretty stingy with all that cash." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Marrera, who was clearing plates at the next table, froze. She glanced at Snoop, whose calm demeanor showed no discomfort. "I try to give back where I can," Snoop replied evenly. "I've supported music programs, built community centers for kids, and helped fund charities." George scoffed. "Sounds like a PR stunt to me." "You big shots only care about your image," murmurs spread across the DI. Some customers nodding in agreement. Marrera felt a surge of indignation. George's words were unfair and misinformed, and she couldn't stand by while someone she respected was berated. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward. "George," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside, "that's not true. Snoop Dogg has done more than most people could dream of. He's given scholarships to students who couldn't afford college, donated to disaster relief efforts, and supported community programs." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. George's brow furrowed. "And you believe all that? How do you know he's not just doing it for the headlines because actions speak louder than words?" Moreira countered. "I've read about the kids whose lives have changed because of his foundation. He doesn't have to do any of that, but he does because he cares." Snoop looked at her, surprise and gratitude flickering across his face. Mira continued, her voice gaining strength. "We live in a world where people with the means don't always step up, but when someone like Snoop does, it's not fair to tear them down." The diner buzzed with whispers again, some patrons appearing moved by her defense. While others remained skeptical, George huffed and returned to his seat, muttering under his breath. But the damage was done. Moreira noticed Mr. Thompson, the diner's owner, stepping out from the kitchen, his expression dark Meor. He said sharply, motioning her over. She approached, her heart sinking. "What were you thinking?" he asked in a low voice. "You don't argue with customers, especially not regulars like George." "I wasn't arguing," she replied, her voice trembling. "I was standing up for someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way." Mus Thompson shook his head. "This is a business, not a debate. Club George and the other regulars are the backbone of this place. If they're upset, we lose their loyalty. I can't have that. I think it's best if you find another job." Mira felt the words like a punch to the gut. "You're firing me for defending someone." "I'll give you a few days to transition," Mr. Thompson said, his tone final. Her vision blurred as tears welled up, but she held her head high, refusing to break in front of him. She glanced at Snoop, who had risen and was watching the exchange, a look of regret on his face. "I'm sorry," Snoop said quietly as she passed by, gathering in her things. "Thank you for standing up for me. You didn't have to do that, but it meant a lot." Mira nodded, managing a weak smile. "You're welcome." The next morning, Mara woke up to find her world crumbling. The enthusiasm that usually greeted the day was now overshadowed by a profound sense of loss as she prepared for what would be her last visit to Sonny's diner. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night, each memory weighing her down like an anchor. Despite the turmoil, life didn't stop. Rent was due and bills needed paying. Reluctantly, Moreira prepared to head back to the diner one last time to collect her final paycheck. The thought of stepping into that space facing those same people made her stomach churn with anxiety. She could already hear the whispers, see the disapproving glances, but she had no choice. She needed the money to keep herself afloat until she found another job. The morning air was crisp as she walked through the quiet streets of Ashford, a golden glow from the rising sun bathing the city. But Moreira couldn't appreciate it. Her heart was heavy, her thoughts clouded. She resolved to keep her head high. No matter what awaited her, she had nothing to be ashamed of. She had spoken the truth even when it was hard. As she approached the diner, something unusual caught her eye. Parked right outside was a sleek black SUV, its polished exterior gleaming in the sunlight, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of Sonny's modest, slightly weathered facade. Mara hesitated, confused, before pushing open the diner door inside. The usual hum of conversation was absent. Instead, an uneasy silence filled the room. Mira's eyes widened as they landed on Snoop Dogg, seated casually in one of the booths. Despite his relaxed posture, he exuded an air of quiet confidence that commanded attention. His simple attire, jeans, a sweatshirt, and his iconic sunglasses did nothing to mask his star power. Behind the counter, Mr. Thompson stood, frozen, his face a mixture of nerves and confusion. The regulars sat, unusually subdued, their eyes flicking between Snoop and Mara. The tension in the room was palpable. "Moreira," Snoop said, standing as she entered, his voice warm, calm, and inviting. "Can we talk?" Mara's heart pounded as she nodded and crossed the room. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her, but for once she didn't care. Following Snoop to the booth, she slid into the seat across from him, trying to keep her composure despite her racing thoughts. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened last night." Snoop began, his tone calm but sincere. "You stood up for me when you didn't have to, and I respect that more than I can say." Mia blinked, unsure of how to respond. "I just thought you deserved someone to stand up for you," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. "And that's exactly why I'm here." Snoop continued, leaning forward slightly. What you did took courage. It showed me the kind of person you are. Someone who stands up for what's right. Even when it's hard, that's rare. And it's something I deeply admire. Marrera tilted her head, confusion mingling with disbelief. I don't understand, she said. Why are you here? Snoop smiled, his expression kind yet determined. My foundation is expanding. We're launching new programs to support underprivileged kids, improve access to education, and create opportunities for people who need a second chance. We need people who are passionate about making a difference, people like you. Me's breath caught in her throat. Are you serious? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Completely, Snoop said without hesitation. I want you to join the team. It's not waiting tables, but it's a chance to be part of something bigger, to use your voice and your heart to help others for a moment. Marrera sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words, the sheer improbability of this offer, leaving her speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality began to sink in. She had lost her job, but in its place she was being offered an opportunity beyond anything she'd ever imagined. I don't know what to say, she whispered, finally, her voice thick with emotion. Say yes, Snoop said, flashing a grin that made her laugh through her tears. Marrera nodded, her resolve finally breaking into a wide, tearful smile. Yes, absolutely yes. Snoop reached across the table and shook her hand, sealing the deal around them. The diner remained eerily quiet. The regulars who had once judged her so harshly now sat stunned into silence. Marrera couldn't help but glance at George, whose expression was a mix of disbelief and what looked like begrudging respect. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, stood rigid behind the counter, his jaw clenched tightly as he processed what was unfolding, his face betraying a hint of guilt. But Marrera didn't dwell on it. Her focus was on the future. As Snoop rose to leave, he turned back to Mia. I'll have someone from my team reach out to you today to get things started. Thank you again for what you did. It meant more than you know. The bell above the door chimed as he walked out, the sound echoing through the diner like the closing of one chapter and the start of another. Marrera sat for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Then she stood, her resolve firm, and walked to the counter to collect her paycheck. Mr. Thompson handed it to her with guilt written all over his face. He then grudgingly told her, although I feel you shouldn't have done what you did last night, I'm sorry for how badly I might have treated you. Marrera met his gaze steadily. You taught me a valuable lesson, she replied simply. Sometimes standing up for what's right is worth more than staying quiet to keep a job with that. She turned and stepped into the sunlight, her heart light with hope. In the weeks that followed, Marrera joined Snoop Dogg's foundation and threw herself into work that felt meaningful and fulfilling. She traveled to communities in need, helped organize educational programs, and met countless individuals whose lives were transformed by their efforts for the first time. She felt like her voice, and actions truly mattered. Looking back, she realized that losing her job at Sonny's Diner wasn't the end she had feared. It was the beginning of a life filled with purpose. That one chance encounter with Snoop Dogg had changed everything, proving that sometimes standing up for what's right opens doors to a brighter future. Disclaimer: all stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes. We advocate for a world where everyone has equal rights under the law and where society continues to grow in fairness, development, and civilization. Our goal is to share heartwarming stories that contribute to making life better. Any resemblance to real events, individuals, or organizations is purely coincidental and unintentional. These stories are not meant to reference any actual people, events, or entities, and contain no political or religious connotations. So,